The international bestseller, the Da Vinci Code, owes its existence to a chance purchase made from a spinning stand outside a small provincial bookshop in central France over 35 years ago. The book was a small paperback called Le Trésor Maudit, the Accursed Treasure, and it was bought by a man called Henry+Lincoln, pictured here outside that same bookshop in Vendôme in 1997. Back in 1969, Lincoln certainly didn't know that the book he was buying for a little light holiday reading was going to change his life. Le Trésor Maudit by Gérard de Sède told the story of a little-known village in the south of France, the now world-famous village of Rennes-le-Château. At the end of the 19th century, so the story went, the priest of this tiny hilltop village in the foothills of the Pyrenees discovered some parchments hidden in his church. Almost overnight, it seems, his life of extreme poverty changed to one of extraordinary wealth. The discovery of the parchments had apparently led him to a lost treasure, the accursed treasure of the title. His village and the tangible evidence of how he disposed of his wealth are there for all to see. The road up to the village, the decoration of the church, his Villa Britannia and its gardens, Belvedere and Tour Magdala, were all built with his money. Where did it come from? The historical and mythical background to the Rennes-le-Château story has been fertile ground for researchers seeking to discover the source of Béranger Saunier's wealth. Over the last 30 years, that quest has spawned an industry. Countless books, films, and documentaries have attempted to explain the mystery. The first and most influential of these was, of course, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, the 1982 bestseller which Henry+Lincoln wrote with Michael Bagent and Richard Lee. Drawing on a hypothesis developed in The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, has now introduced a whole new audience to the enigma surrounding Rennes-le-Château. But in the intervening years, Henry+Lincoln has discovered another mystery. A mystery that goes far beyond the supposed treasure at Rennes-le-Château. The priest's riches are a distraction from the real secret of the village, that it is but a small part of a much greater wonder. It is, in fact, part of one of the wonders of the ancient world. This programme seeks to explain why this little-known area in the Languedoc region of France could truly be described as a holy place. In fact, the true mystery isn't confined to Rennes-le-Château, but has echoes elsewhere, and is expressed in perfect form on a tiny island in the Baltic Sea. These discoveries at Rennes-le-Château and on the Danish island of Bornholm are extraordinarily challenging, and they pose new questions about our ancient ancestors, their motivations, their skills, and their knowledge. Over the last 30 years, Rennes-le-Château has transformed from a sleepy, remote mountaintop hamlet into a mecca for mystics, treasure hunters, New Age thinkers and seekers after the truth. What draws people here from all over the world? And what do they expect to find here? Well, the story would still be just a little-known local mystery, and there would be no books, no films, no best-selling Da+Vinci+Code, and no tourist trail if Henry Lincoln hadn't made a discovery that eventually took him far beyond the contents of that little red paperback, Le Trésor Maudit. In the summer of 1969, Lincoln, it seems, was the first to break a secret code.
There I was, having read the way through the book, looking at the reproductions of two of the parchments which the priest had apparently found. And there it was, a passage from the Gospels in Latin, which talked of Jesus walking in the cornfields with the disciples, and they did rub the ears of corn and did eat. And suddenly I find myself reading off a message in French. Very simple. It was hidden in a way that I've always described as a schoolboy code.
Some of the letters were slightly raised above the others. When these were picked out, the hidden message was easily readable.
It was so easy to find. And it simply said, "This treasure belongs to Dagobert II, king, and to Zion, and he is there dead."
Nowhere in the rest of the book was there any reference to this decipherment. Was Lincoln the only person to have discovered this childishly simple code? Why hadn't the author mentioned it? For Lincoln, it was an incomplete solution. The book became his constant companion during the next months, the parchments providing hours of enjoyable distraction. But despite tantalizing glimmers of other layers below the surface, he found nothing as clear as that first ringing message. However, the historical background to the story was fascinating. Rennes-le-Château is in the Languedoc, a region of France which is both overwhelmingly beautiful and blessed with many traces of its rich and turbulent past. It was here that the Cathar heresy took root, flourished, and was viciously suppressed by the Roman Church. In these mountains, the Knights Templar, proud warrior monks, established castles and commanderies. Arab invaders, Visigothic hordes, crusading armies, all passed this way. Behind the story of this 19th century priest and his discoveries lay centuries of fanaticism, faith and suffering, a complex and bloody history which was almost unknown outside France. To Lincoln, a television scriptwriter, the subject seemed made for a TV documentary.
At that time there was a series being done by the BBC called Chronicle, which dealt with subjects of historical and archaeological interest. And I thought it would be a good subject for them. So I took it to the producer and he agreed.
2 years later, in 1972, the BBC aired Lincoln's first television documentary.
And that programme, The Lost Treasure of Jerusalem, which told the story of the priest Béranger Saunière and his little village of Rennes-le-Château, was the first that anybody outside France had ever heard of this extraordinary story.
But it wasn't the last. The public reaction was so strong that in the decade that followed, Lincoln made 2 more films for the BBC, The Priest, the Painter and the Devil in 1975, and The Shadow of the Templars in 1979. By the time the third film was made, the research involved had become too much for one man, so Lincoln brought in 2 others to help, Richard Lee and Michael Bagent.
And the three of us began to research in more depth and cover much more ground of what the story was all about. And that led eventually to the hypothesis, which we presented in a book published in 1982, and which was called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. Now, it seemed very much a case that that book touched a nerve back in 1982, part of the zeitgeist, if you like, and it created a huge reaction. It became a bestseller immediately. We were on the front pages right around the world because we had developed an hypothesis which appeared to explain all the background to this apparent treasure story.
The book became as huge a publishing phenomenon as its fictional offspring, the Da Vinci Code, was to do some 20 years later. It was back in 1972, while he was making the initial BBC film, that Lincoln received the first hint that this was something more than just a treasure story. As part of his research, he travelled to Paris to meet Gérard de Sède, author of Le Trésor Maudit.
One of the first questions I asked him was, why didn't you publish the hidden message in the parchments? And he said, what message? That struck me as being a very curious response, because I thought he must know it was there. And if he knew it was there, then he'd know that I knew it was there. So we fenced around this for a little while. And eventually we got to the point where we both knew that we were talking about the same message. So I repeated the question, why didn't you publish it? And he said, because we thought it might interest someone like you to find it for yourself. Now, that was an extraordinary response. I thought I was dealing with a simple little treasure hunt story set in a village. And yet suddenly there was a we in the background who thought it might be of interest to someone like me. There was something odd in the background, and I could sense it from that moment on.
It would be another 7 years before Lincoln discovered the identity of that we in the background. It was the now infamous Priory of Zion. Lincoln's researches seem to suggest that the source of Béranger Saunier's wealth wasn't gold or treasure, but a secret of such significance that those protecting it would go to any lengths to safeguard its existence. All the clues, all the arcane twists and turns, the hidden codes, effaced tombstones, secret documents, paintings and statuary, the elements that sparked the imaginations of the BBC Chronicle audience through 3 films, suggested that there were people in the background who knew a great secret and were taking enormous pains to protect it. Yet at the same time, they seemed to be deliberately placing obscure hints to draw attention to its existence.
Is the Priory of Zion a genuine secret society, an organisation hidden in the background and manipulating affairs?